Hey folks, and welcome back to the garden. Today we're going to do another full tour of this food forest that I'm in right now. And I've got a lot of new subscribers. So for those of you new here, my name is Megan. I live in southwest New Mexico in the desert, and my gardening zone is 8A. Now in this main garden area, I have a little less than 2,500 square feet of planting space. Although I do have several little small garden plots included in my front yard and just out in the middle of the field that I'm just trying to grow wherever I can. So that number is just approximate for how much planting space I actually have. Now my garden is filled with gnats right now. No-see-ums, they're biting midges, biting flies, biting gnats, they're commonly called. I have bug spray on, but forgive me if I end up putting on mesh mask over my face, because the longer I'm out here, the more that come to me. So I will try and get through as much of this as I can where you can see my face, but later on I might be wearing a net. So let's get started. The gnats are a little less terrible in the sun and there's a slight breeze. It's about 11 a.m. and 90 degrees right now, so not too terrible. We're supposed to be getting our first 100-degree days at the beginning of next week. Not excited for that. The plants are also not excited for that. But we will start in the sun over here in this first bed and try and stave off the gnats as long as possible so that I can continue to talk to you guys. So here we have this gorgeous sunflower. I don't have a name for it because it is from saved seed, but it is a multi-headed sunflower that I believe definitely cross-pollinated last year, because the seeds I saved it from was a single-stemmed tall sunflower. And that's what we're all about here, is saving seeds, cross-pollinated seeds, so that they have hybrid vigor and I can grow crops here that do well in my environment. Now, if you've seen any of my previous gardening videos, I did have onions here for most of this year, and I still have a couple. I have one or two that have not fallen over yet that I will let continue to grow until they do fall over. But this morning, I took out the rest of the onions that had fallen, added some more soil and some amendments, and then replanted with beans. Now, specifically the beans that I planted are these ones, which I've sown earlier than the rest of the holes you see in here. But this is a California black eye number 5. And technically it's a cowpea, so what you would normally know it as a black-eyed pea, a field pea. It is a legume, but cowpeas tend to do better in hot environments where I'm at. And I really loved their production last year. I saved a ton of seeds. So they are my main crop of beans that I'm growing this year to store as dried beans. Now, starting on this trellis and also on that side, but this is a little more unhealthy than this one. This is an Armenian cucumber plant, which is actually a type of melon, but tastes a lot like cucumber. You use it as cucumber. You can also let it get big enough to eat as a melon. Frankly, I just need a heat-tolerant cucumber variety, so this is my first year growing this. It's doing well. I've gotten one Armenian cucumber off of it, but other than that, the plants have a bit of a slow start. I'm not sure why, but this one looks very healthy. It's doing great. And as you can see, I've still got some onions here that when they fall over, when their stems fall over, lay flat, that means they'll be ready. So I'm just letting these guys keep going, get as big as they can before I harvest the rest of them. This right here is bee balm, which did not do well for me last year. It doesn't love desert environments, but it was covered by a bunch of onion leaves before I pulled them all out. I'm not sure it's gonna make it now that it's completely exposed to the sun, but we're gonna try. And this bed here is the other Armenian cucumber. I have several plants in here. They're looking a bit worse for wear, more yellow, less green than the other side, but this was a poorly amended bed. All of my plants in here are doing poor compared to the rest. And I will show you the difference in peppers in 1 second. But here I have some Genovese basil, several pepper plants. That one's a sugar rush peach. This is also a sugar rush peach. This is a serrano, padrone, and then several types of squash plants on the outskirts as well. These long trailing varieties are going to be Tromboncino. And these 1, 2, 3, these varieties are all yellow, just plain crookneck yellow squash. This is one of my favorite summer squashes, and this is called a rondenise. And you can see the little babies coming up. This one's doing pretty well. It had a slow start, but it seems to have picked up after I added some fertilizer to this bed. But if you see the color of these plants compared to perhaps the peppers over here, which are much richer green, the rest of the garden is clearly doing better than this first bed. But that's okay. It takes a while to build up soil to make it super rich and healthy. And most years when I put in newly developed beds like this, because I don't spend a ton of money putting very good soil in, it takes a little while to build up that organic matter in the soil that makes for very healthy and good organic plants. Now here's my first bed, my wall of tomatoes that I have continuing to grow all the way up. And I have several varieties here. This one is an Amish paste. Look at how huge this guy is. It's as big as my palm. But this is a paste tomato. It's very meaty, doesn't have too many seeds or too much juice. I do intend to use a lot of these paste tomatoes for sauce once they ripen up. And right next to it, I've got a slicer. This is a German pink. These are amazingly good tomatoes. I'm so excited for these to ripen up. I actually have one ripening up over here. Come here, little guy. But it's not quite ready yet, so we'll give it maybe another day or at least until this afternoon. And right next to it, I have a chocolate pear tomato, and I've got a couple ripening ones right here. It's a reddish brown color when it ripens. It doesn't actually get chocolate colored, I found, but this is actually pretty ripe. So that's the color that it should be. Yummy. And here I have a cherry tomato variety called Mexico Midget, which is also ripening up. Several of them are. This is one of my favorite cherry tomato varieties. It does really well here in the heat. I'm not sure it's like natural origins, but I've grown this tomato every year since I've been on this property, and it always does fantastic. Now directly north of this is a mainly pepper bed. Living in New Mexico, I grew up on hot chili peppers. New Mexico is famous for hatch green chili, and peppers are my by far most favorite fruit to grow. I do love tomatoes, of course, but I love peppers more. So I have several varieties here in this bed. This is called a jalafuego. So it's a jalapeno, so very similar to a jalapeno, except it's supposed to be a little bit hotter. And honestly, compared to half of the store-bought jalapenos that I find, this is great. They're never hot enough, and to notch up that heat a little bit is wonderful. They don't necessarily get as big as some of these like huge stuffing jalapenos are in the store, but that's fine. I'm okay with it. All along this row, I have several more. I think I have 1, 2, 3, 4 Sugar Rush Peach jalapenos. Or correction, Sugar Rush Peach peppers. And here is a Thai chili pepper. These little guys, they turn red. You'll often find them in Oriental food. They're very hot as well. We like using these for drying and grinding them up and putting them in jars for spices. I cook a lot from scratch, but I don't cook a lot of Oriental food from scratch. So I don't add them to a whole lot of dishes just because they have a very specific flavor. But when you dehydrate them and like make chili powder or chili granules out of them, it's amazing. And here on this trellis, I have some sad beans. These are the rattlesnake pole beans. And I grew these last year. They did not do very well, and as you can see, a couple of them are also just dying. They are supposedly a heat-tolerant pole bean, but these last 2 years that I've tried to grow them, they have not thrived in the heat, so I don't know if they require like a humid sort of heat, which we don't have here. We have a very dry heat. So I don't think I'm gonna get much of a harvest off of these guys. Once the temps started kicking up into the high 90s, I had several vines just wither up and die. So I'm absolutely going to replant these with my favorite bean to grow here, which is the asparagus bean, and I will show you that in a second. It does excellent here, and it's an excellent green bean. And this massive trellis is filled with 2 Tahitian melon plants. Look at this guy. Look at, he's bigger than my arm. Let me come around the side here. So this plant just took off at the beginning of the year when it was still cool. As you can see over here, with the temps and the sun, it does not appear to like the heat as much as some of my other squashes, but I did get a lot of production out of it early in the year. So I will have some Tahitian melons to harvest if it stops producing. Look at this guy. This is so big. One of the biggest difficulties of growing in the desert is obviously the lack of rainfall, so I'm constantly watering every single day. But it's also the heat, and it's a heat in the summer. So if I get these plants in early enough, they will take off like this Tahitian melon did, and then produce a bit. But once we get to the hundreds of July and the end of June, everything kind of slows way down. If it's a cool, loving, cold tolerant plant, it will not survive our summers here. But even a plant like this, squash that does well in the heat, they will slow down production a lot just because it's so hot for them. So usually the goal is to get a ton of production during our spring months. Then we know that the plants will kind of take a break from producing a bunch, and then they'll kick back up again in August and September when we have our monsoon season. So it cools off just a tad and we get a bunch of rain. So right here in this tomato bed, I used to have 7 plants in this bed. I lost 2 of them to curly top disease, but I do have 1 over here. This is a giant crimson tomato, and I can't really differentiate it from the rest of the plants. Everything's just kind of growing together. Normally in a humid environment, you would not want to do this to your tomato plants because they would be very diseased and like no air circulation. But here in the desert, having this much foliage together, especially because we're just so dry, there's not a lot of humidity and moisture to cause disease on these plants, it helps them shade each other out. So I do prune a little where the foliage is too thick, like they may not get a lot of airflow through them, but otherwise having all this foliage together on these plants just helps protect them from the sun. Now right next to this tomato bed, I have a 4x4 bed that is just planted with everything essentially. Here I have a eucalyptus plant. I have 2 peppers as well. This is a Bikino pepper. It has not started producing yet, but these guys are pretty late bloomers. They take a while to get started. And then right here I have a New Mexico Big Jim pepper, which has also not started producing, but this guy was planted later than the rest of them. And this massive thing is a Tromboncino squash. So if you get in here somewhere, oh, there it is. That is a giant Tromboncino squash. So Tromboncino is very similar to the Tahitian melon in looks. The Tahitian melon can also be eaten green, but traditionally the Tromboncino is supposed to be eaten like a zucchini. You can also let it get hard and store it like a winter squash, so wait till it develops a hard outer rind, then you can store it all winter. Most of these I have picked I've eaten like zucchini, and they are excellent. They're very tender and light flavored, so they don't have a huge squashy taste to them. That big one I just showed you, I am going to leave though, because I want to save some seeds from this Tromboncino squash. It's doing amazing. Look at it. That's got to be at minimum 12, 15 feet long. It's just spreading all over from a single plant that I planted right here. Now here I have a tomato. I don't know which variety this is, honestly, and I've not trellised it up yet, but I'm probably going to trellis it the same way that I did this guy, which is, I forget what the method is called, but you essentially tie a string and then weave the string all the way up to some sort of stabilizer you have on top. And then as this guy grows, you just weave the stem around the string. I do not want to go buy any more trellises for my tomatoes, and this is a cheap way of doing it. This guy right here is an Estiva tomato. It is an F1 hybrid from Johnny's Seed. None of them have ripened yet, but they look delicious. They're so nice. This right here is holy basil, also called Tulsi, and this is a Genovese basil. And here on both sides of these trellis, I just have a 1x4 bed, and I usually plant just beans to run up this trellis. I have two different kinds of beans in here. First off, I have the asparagus beans, which grow amazingly, but I think all of these are the purple hull pink eye cowpea, which is my first year growing these cowpeas. And they had a bit of a late start, but they seem to be taking off now. They're definitely not as prolific as the asparagus beans, but they've started to wind themselves up. No bean production yet. Over here, mostly purple hull pink eye as well. And I need to affix some of these so they start trellising themselves. And here in this second 4x4 bed, I have mostly tomatoes, except for this perennial rosemary, which comes back every year. Rosemary grows great here in the desert, as long as it's sufficiently watered. But I do have 4 plants of... But here in this bed, I have 4 plants of the Grand Marshal F1 hybrid. It is a determinate variety, meaning that it will grow for a limited amount of time, produce a bunch of fruit, and then they will ripen all at once and the plant will die. Unfortunately, I have had some problems with blossom end rot on a lot of these plants. Let me find you one. I just pulled this tomato off. So this is blossom end rot in a tomato. And blossom end rot occurs when there's insufficient watering or irregular watering. It causes the plants to not be able to uptake calcium. I didn't even notice it was happening until I poked around in here the other day and saw a ton of the bottom tomatoes had it. So I immediately watered the entire bed, hand watered it, and I'm assuming that it's probably because some of my hosing from my drip system just clogged up. We have pretty hard water here. Which stinks, because this was going to be my crop where I used a lot of these tomatoes to make sauce and paste and all that stuff for canning. But I think most of them are good. It's really the lower tomatoes that have a lot of it. You can, first off, you need to fix it by fixing your watering system or fixing your watering schedule so that these plants are getting the correct amount of water when they need it. But you can do a quick fix, and I've done this in the past. I did not do it with these plants. But you can do a quick fix by mashing up some like antacids, like Tums, and sprinkling it around the base of the plant. That's a super quick fix to fix it. But like I said, it's from irregular, insufficient watering, and the plant itself can't take up calcium. So putting Tums on it long term isn't really a good solution. You just need to fix your watering. So moving back over here to this bed, this was where I had all of my garlic that I planted last fall. I harvested on a separate video, which I will link. But after harvesting all of my garlic, I went and replanted this with a mixture of okra and my bush cowpeas that I love. I have a huge roly-poly problem, and I did use diatomaceous earth, but unfortunately, because I need to water every day because it's so hot and dry here, it tends to make the diatomaceous earth inactive. It just doesn't work the way it should. So I had spotty germination with the okra and the beans, although some came up. And a lot of those holes look freshly planted because I did when I did the onion bed this morning. I also came back in here. Everything that didn't germinate before, I just reseeded with beans. And here on this end, I have 2 tomato plants. I do not know the varieties they are. I lost the tag to them. But I figured I would make use of this trellis right here and just trellis the tomatoes to this arching trellis. So I wouldn't have to buy any trellis. But it seems to be working out very well. These look healthy and happy. And honestly, this might be a cherry tomato variety with how these blossoms are. But I think that one's going to be a slicer variety. I'm just not sure which. They have not started putting out fruit yet. Here I have my designated mint bed. These are just chives that have gone to seed, which I'll just like pull these blossoms off and spread it around. Spread the love. Mint needs to be contained. It likes to take over garden areas, so I keep it in this cute little bed and it won't ruin the rest of my garden. Now these are my pride and joy asparagus beans. Look how far they are already. And I believe there's a few, yeah, we've got a few beans coming in right here. Asparagus beans are also called Chinese noodle beans. They're a little rubbery, but they're great as green beans. Not as dried beans, but as green beans. And they get super long, like a foot, foot and a half, 2 feet long. So there's a lot of food for each bean. I mean, I could cut up one single bean and have like 6 sections of normal sized green beans. So they're great. They love the heat. They do excellent here, even though I think they originated in humid environments. They do not seem to mind my dry heat at all. So I grow these every year. They're the best producing green bean that I have. And here is another pepper bed. So I have yarrow over here, but I have several types of peppers. These are going to be banana peppers. These are green chilies, as in hatch green chilies. I have bell pepper over there. These yellow flowers are cosmos. These are padron peppers. They are delicious hot peppers. I read that padrones will be not spicy if you pick them early enough and they're green. They're often used as like an appetizer, kind of like shishitos. Shishitos aren't hot either. And you just fry them in some oil, salt and pepper them, and they're so good. You eat them. But I like to wait until the padrones get red. That's when they're mature, and then they are the perfect amount of heat, which for me is like pretty hot. But they're excellent. They taste very, very good dried and used as a seasoning, like a hot seasoning as well. So that's what we did a lot last year with all the extra padrones we had. I just dried them up, dehydrated them, and we still have a jar. Chase, my boyfriend, uses it on everything. These Bright Lights Cosmos are still going strong. I do deadhead them pretty regularly, which is just pulling off the dehydrating or dying flower heads. That looks good. This here is oh, this is really pokey. I don't know how to grab this. This is safflower. So if you've ever used safflower oil or saffron as a spice, safflower is also called poor man's saffron. You use the petals as you would use saffron spice, which is a very, very expensive spice. I have not used any of it this year. I've just enjoyed its beauty. Because frankly, I never use saffron, so I wouldn't even know what to put it in. But it's pretty. It's very pokey, very sharp. Look at these deadly edges. Ooh, very, very pokey. And here's a shishito pepper, which I'm picking from regularly now. But once this plant gets a little bit bigger, I'm gonna have way too many shishitos to eat. This is another green chili or red chili. Another padrone. And this is a multi-headed sunflower that is not bloomed yet. I'm not sure if it's one of my saved seeds or something else. I honestly don't label a whole lot of my sunflower varieties. Here's another yarrow, which I have severely cut back just because I don't want them to blot out the sun from the peppers, but I do love that it sprawled this way and still bloomed. It's gorgeous, and the bees love it as well. Now here's my final tomato bed. I used to have 9 tomatoes in here. If you guys have watched any of my previous videos, you'll know I have had a huge problem with disease on my tomatoes this year. And this bed has been no exception. So, my previous video, I did a video on diagnosing bacterial wilt. I'm gonna pull this guy out soon, not today, but soon, and try and diagnose what's wrong with him. But he's gone. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tomato plants left in here. They're various slicers except for this multiflora cherry tomato variety, which is called Barry's Crazy Cherry. It is delicious. It's a yellow variety, but look at how many tomatoes. Ew. Something got into that one. And then all along the edge here, I have various flowers. There's another safflower, peppercini pepper. This is a Bright Lights Cosmo. Again, a bit more orangey than the first variety. Let me pull that guy off. This is a pepper. I did not label this one, so I'm not sure what this is. This is a Thai basil. Another pepper variety, not sure which, and a Genovese basil. Now at the edge of this bed, I have some very, very slow growing cucumbers. These are the Thunder cucumbers. They're a hybrid from Johnny's Seeds as well. I grew a few hybrids this year just because I was interested in seeing how heat tolerant varieties that are hybrids would do. Well, it looks like we had, there's a little cucumber. I don't know if it's gonna make it, but these got a late start, but they are picking up now, and hopefully I can get some cucumbers off of them. I had a terrible time with cucumbers last year. It just gets really hot really quickly here before they get a chance to completely vine out. I do have the Armenian cucumbers, which love the heat, but I wanted some specific cucumbers to try and grow again. Hope we get some. They're doing okay. I don't have a trellis for them, but they'll sprawl across the ground. They'll be fine. Now finally we have come to the in-ground garden, which is doing well, and I need to replant it. I have pulled up a lot of potato plants, but I still have some here. These are the Corolla potato varieties that are just not quite died back yet. And in order to get the maximum harvest from your potato plants, you want to wait until the green leafy plant actually completely dies back, because that's going to be when the tubers, the potatoes themselves, are the largest. So I'm just waiting, just keep on waiting until they're done. So mostly in this first row, in fact, a lot of these rows are just mainly potato plants. But I have interplanted some crops like this okra, and you'll see a lot of these guys. These are corn plants that I have seeded after I've pulled up various potatoes. My potato crop did not do super well this year. I planted two different types of potatoes. One was one I've grown before, which is the dark red Norland. That actually did the worst. I did not get maybe like 5 pounds max from the dark red Norlands. I just had terrible germination. But most of these left are the Corollas. So I'm gonna see once we end up harvesting how well they did. Obviously they did better than the dark red Norlands because the plants actually survived. But I am excited to see what they look like when we finally dig them up. And the pride and joy of my garden right now are these common New Mexican sunflowers, which I religiously deadhead. Look at these bees. And the bees love them. But I have been every morning coming out here and cutting off the dead blooms so that they keep producing flowers. And my goodness, aren't they just glorious? Oh. Now over here I have some self-seeded pumpkin plants from a rind that I threw in here last year. And if I can find it, oh, there it is. There's a little pumpkin beginning to grow. But other than that, not a whole lot of fruit coming off these guys yet, but they are still rather small. Oh, I've got a little baby one right here too, right there. But as you can see, the ground is just littered with spent blooms that I've cut off. So these guys just keep making beautiful flowers. So the reason you deadhead flowering plants, or just flowers in general, deadheading is called deadheading because once the flower actually dies on the stalk, that's when you want to cut it off. A plant's main goal is to produce seeds. So seeds on flowers usually come from the flower itself, and if I were to let all of these flowers die, the plant would produce seeds from those flower heads and then think that it's it's done for the season because it did what it wanted to do. Spread the seed for the next generation. And I don't want that to happen yet because I want these flowers to stay gorgeous all summer. So what you need to do is cut off your dead flower heads so the plant constantly thinks that, oh, I'm not done producing flowers yet. So that's why you deadhead. Now on this half of the in-ground garden bed, it is uncovered by this shade cloth. And you can see the various corn plants I've put in places, but this is mostly like 90% squash. Now I do not have many of these squash plants labeled because I just threw seeds all willy-nilly at the beginning of the year. Although I can identify some of them, like this one. This is the Rondinese, one of my favorite summer squashes. And it's producing very well, and I should probably harvest this guy tomorrow. I do know this one is a pumpkin. This was a self-seeded pumpkin. Again, I don't know how the seeds ended up over here. And now that this is growing, I can tell that this is a cantaloupe, which is exciting. But other than that, if they aren't producing, I don't quite know what they are yet. So we're just gonna wait and see. I do have a few pepper plants that I put in here. They are not doing that well. They look rather small and sickly, but I do know they're all green and red chili plants. And these ones are doing the best. They're actually producing, and I might harvest these pretty soon. But other than that, all we got is squash, maybe some watermelons, a few cantaloupes in here. And as I pull out these potato plants, I do plan to reseed, most likely with beans or some okra, something that is quick growing and loves the heat, because unfortunately, by the time I end up harvesting these potatoes, it's gonna be in the hundreds. So I can't go planting anything that, you know, doesn't love heat or just won't survive. I'm surprised these potatoes have gone on this long because potatoes are a cool weather crop. So they should be dying soon. Now I should be completing my garden tour with the in-ground garden I have over there, but I'm gonna do that in a separate video. There are only a few select plants in that bed that are doing pretty well, and I know why they are and what seeds they're from, so I want to make a completely separate video about that at a later date. But this is my food forest. Isn't it lovely? But thank you guys for joining me on this tour today. I'm so excited for all of the produce I'm gonna have this year. If you have any questions about the plants or how they're doing or which ones I really love, I'm sure I didn't cover everything in this video, but please leave me a comment down below. Like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Thank you for joining me, and I will catch you on the next one.